Hello folks. This is going to be a video about the race start situation, not particularly about the fact that, Charles Leclerc gets a really good start or the Ferrari Powers cars do. It's much more so about the fact that so many drivers started the race in Australia with 0% battery charge on the grid. We had Russell, Antonelli, Hadjar and Verstappen confirmed from the team that they started the race with 0% battery. And it's quite the odd situation, really. I mean, I'll sort of get into a little bit about why this happens, but this video is not going to have any sort of visuals or anything like that, so feel free to put it on in the background if you would like. And yeah, well, we'll just go sort of straight into it then. So the cars come out of the grid on Sunday morning. They're sat on the garage. They're sat in the garage overnight, and they're fully charged up at that point. And then, as soon as they leave the garage, the teams are no longer allowed to recharge the batteries. They can't just get a power bank right while they're sat on the grid and recharge the battery. As soon as they leave the garage, that is it. And the cars have to, provide the battery themselves by recharging. So they go out onto the circuit. They do a few reconnaissance laps, right? 3 or 4 reconnaissance laps. That's when Oscar Piastri crashed. But this is the thing: the drivers are not pushing on those reconnaissance laps. They're going very, very slowly. Piastri, of course, had an issue with his power unit that gave him an extra 100 horsepower when he wasn't expecting, and then he spun. But for the most part, they are deploying a little bit of battery here and there on the reconnaissance laps, and they're not recharging it that much because they aren't going that quickly to get an effective amount of battery back, because basically the quicker you decelerate, the more you're going to recharge your battery. But on the reconnaissance laps, they're not accelerating very quickly. They're also not decelerating very quickly. So what will most likely happen is they'll do these 4 or 5 laps, and they will drop their battery percentage down from 100 to maybe like 80, maybe 70, and then they're on the starting grid, right? They're on the starting grid. They sit there for around 40 minutes waiting around. They do the national anthem and everything. And then we've got the formation lap. And over the course of the formation lap, the main thing for the drivers, right, in all of the previous years of Formula 1, the main thing has always been front tyres, rear tyres, front brakes, rear brakes. Those are the 4 things that they've got to bring up to temperature to ensure that when they go into the turn 1, lap 1, that the car is working in its optimal condition. And I'm sure some of you guys have seen that video of Richard Hammond driving the Renault 2005 Formula 1 car, and he had the problem where essentially he was driving too slow to build up any tyre temperature and to build up any brake temperature, and the car was just not gripping up whatsoever. And yeah, that's what would happen if the drivers drive too slowly on the formation lap and don't prioritize those things. If they don't prioritize bringing up the front tire temperature, front brake temperature, then they're going into turn number 1 with no brakes, and they're just going to overshoot the corner. So that's very, very important for the drivers to do. And well, now they've got one additional factor that they've got to consider over the formation lap. They've got to keep the battery charged at 100%. But they're two sort of very conflicting, contrasting goals, because to warm up your front tires, you've got to do a lot of weaving. And the higher speed you do that weaving at, so you do the weaving at 200 kilometers per hour, 250 kilometers per hour, the more your front tires get warmed up. And then to warm up the front brakes, what they do is they shift all of the brake balance forwards, right? So it's got, the Lewis Hamilton magic button from Baku 2021. It shifts the brake balance forwards to about 70% on the front tires, and it warms up those warms up the brakes, the front brakes, and essentially they are warming up the brakes and also warming up the tires from the inside, right? You've got these super hot brake discs, and the heat emanates outwards and warms up the core of the tire. So both the core and the outside of the tires are getting warmed up. But to warm up the front brakes, you've got to accelerate up to 200, 250 Ks, and then also slow right back down again. And to accelerate up and then slow back down over the course of only a 5 kilometer long circuit, you've got to do this acceleration very, very quickly and the deceleration very quickly. So you've got to use your battery at some point to get the car up to speed and then bring it back down again. And to accelerate the car, you use the battery, but of course when you're decelerating, your aim is to warm up the front brakes. It's not to recharge the battery. So the drivers, there's no sort of recharging going on at that point, and they essentially will lose 5%, 10% over each acceleration, deceleration that they do, because they want to use the brakes to slow down the car, not the MGUK, so the brakes actually get warm and they're usable on lap 1. And then to warm up the rear tyres, the drivers do burnouts just as they're approaching the grid. They do normally 3 burnouts, and they last approximately 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds or so. And well, these Formula One cars are very, very grippy. If you were just to try and do the burnouts with just the internal combustion engine, no battery whatsoever, with only 500 horsepower, you're not going to spin up those rear tires because the cars have got so much grip. So over the course of 3 burnouts for two seconds per burnout, you've got 6 seconds where you have to deploy the battery to get those rear tires spinning up. If you cannot do that, which Kimi Antonelli actually couldn't, he had run out of battery charge before he had even come to the start finish straight, and that's where the drivers normally do the burnout. So Antonelli couldn't do the burnouts. If you watch the start from Charles Leclerc's perspective, you can see Antonelli gets a whole bunch of wheel spin, has no grip from the rear tires, and a very, very bad race start. And that was totally down to the fact that he couldn't do his burnouts because, well, he didn't have the battery on the start finish straight to, well, get the wheels spinning. So yeah, that is very, very important to do to get those burnouts done. But as we know, to go from 100% charge all the way down to 0% charge, it only takes 8 seconds, 9 seconds of total deployment. And if you've got to do burnouts for 6 seconds before you approach the starting grid, then, well, your battery is going to get depleted just doing those burnouts, and you're not going to have any opportunity to recharge them because as soon as the lights are going to go out and you'll be racing. So it's a very interesting situation, and I don't even know how the teams are going to combat this. Charles Leclerc had low battery, so I suspect when Leclerc came onto the starting grid, Ferrari had thought of this, and they had charged up his battery as much as they could over the formation lap, and then they, of course, deployed it all over again to do the burnouts. But Charles Leclerc started with a low battery. Verstappen had just started with 0 battery. Same thing for Antonelli, same thing for Russell, and and then over the course of lap number 1, there were loads of drivers saying that they were doing recharging, like they were recharging, lifting and coasting lap 1, like the lap 1 where you're meant to make 5 different overtakes to try and gain your positions. Drivers are recharging the battery. Honestly, it just doesn't really make that much sense to me. And I have no idea how they're going to fix it. In China, it's going to be slightly different, right? Because if you look at the race layout in Australia, you've got turn number 11 is your big braking zone, and then you've got to drive slowly through 12, 13, 14, and then you go to the starting grid. So you've not got huge amounts of recharge opportunity in the final sector in Australia. In China, it's slightly different. You've got this really big hairpin as the second to last corner. So they have an opportunity there to recharge the battery. But will they want to recharge the battery? Because they also want front brake temperature, and typically that's what they do in China. They accelerate all the way down the straight, weaving left and right, bringing up the front tire temperature, and then into the hairpin they slam on the front brakes, bringing up the brake temperature. And yeah, if they do that, then they're not recharging the battery, and then how are they going to do the burnouts? So it's two sort of things pulling the drivers and the teams in different directions. One saying that you want the brakes to slow down the car to warm the brakes up, and the other saying that you want to slow down the car using the MGUK to charge the battery up. So we may even have a situation quite consistently over the course of the season where we have drivers starting the first lap of the race with just no battery charge whatsoever. The teams are going to do some things to try and fix it. I think Mercedes did have some potential engine mapping issues over the formation lap, and that might help them a little bit, but it is very, very strange, and I can't see any sort of obvious solution. So if you guys can sort of think of anything, then be sure to let me know. But the idea of just, we'll switch off the battery and we'll just run on the internal combustion engine over the formation lap is not going to work, right? Because you have to be attacking all of these corners, and you have to be accelerating up really quick and decelerating really quick to warm the tyres up, to warm the brakes up. And yeah, you're not going to do that with just 500 horsepower. So you have to use the battery. So where do you go from there, right? So that's about that for the video. It's sort of a new style of video. I've never really done anything like this with just a sort of a webcam, so do let me know what you think, and if you'd like to see more of this sort of stuff. But I'll see you in the live stream for China. Bye bye, folks.